This recording is going to cover the brainstem and functional brain areas. Now we're going to start with the brainstem, which you see here, and it includes the midbrain, the pons, and I don't like when they just say medulla, but the medulla oblongata. So we're going to look at each one of them individually. So on this picture, you can see, looking at underneath the brain, this here is the midbrain, this is the pons, and that's the medulla oblongata. So again, and I'm going to do it on the sagittal view, this would be midbrain, pons, and that is the medulla oblongata. This here, as you see, the cerebellum. So let's start with, we're going to start with the midbrain, but all of these, or I should say the brainstem in general, are very important in certain reflexes, or I should say automatic behaviors. Things are important for survival. They're going to be areas of tracks, ascending, descending tracks that have to run to and from the cerebrum. So we're going to look at some of the specific regions and what they do. Now we're going to start with the midbrain. It's also called the mesencephalon, and what you're looking at is a posterior view of the brainstem. And so what you'll see in the green, here's the green, and you see it here. Here is the midbrain. And on the posterior view, you're going to see this thing called the corpora quadrigemina. Corpora is a word that is plural for bodies. Quad means four, Gemini means twin, and what we have is we have 1, 2, 3, 4 bodies, and we have on the top, we have what referred to as the superior colliculi, and on the bottom, we have what's referred to as the inferior colliculi. Singular would be colliculus. This is a word that means a hill, because they're kind of rounded. Now, the superior colliculi is gray matter, and this is where we have cell bodies of motor neurons that innervate muscles, where it will be involved in certain reflexes, and specifically reflexes in regards to visual stimuli. So think about like what happens if someone shines a bright light in your eye. Even before the information is processed in the primary visual cortex, it's initially processed here. And if you have that bright light, you may close your eyes or turn your head away from that bright light. And these certain motor pathways that are regulated at a subconscious level actually are, those cell bodies are located here within that superior colliculi. Now, my dog barking was actually worked out to be a perfect segue into what the inferior colliculi do. Is if you have a loud noise, or all of a sudden the dog barks, and you kind of like, instinctively kind of turn your head in the direction of that loud noise, it's actually being processed in the inferior colliculi. So you have cell bodies of motor neurons that innervate muscles that will cause, your head to move, or your, body to turn in that direction of that loud noise. And so again, before you even process it in the auditory cortex in your temporal lobe, it's initially processed here. But again, it's at a subconscious level. You're not aware that all of a sudden you turned in regards to before you even really heard anything. So it's very instinctive, or say it's a reflex. So you have in the midbrain the corpora quadrigemina, which include both the superior and inferior colliculi. Now we will talk about this again when we talk about motor pathways. And they're going to be part of what when I talk about that later, we call tectospinal tracts. Another tract that we'll talk about at a later date is going to be called the rubrospinal tracts. And what we have in the midbrain, we have where you see the R, we have the location of the red nuclei. So this is gray matter, can groups of cell bodies, and this is going to be of motor neurons that will be innervating muscles, but they're going to be controlling your upper limb position and muscle tone. Again, this is at a subconscious level, and it's actually part of when we talk about the rubrospinal tracts. Now, another group of cell bodies, gray matter, that we find in the midbrain is referred to as the substantia nigra, which you see as the SN, literally means black substance. Now, I'll show you it here. So, substantia nigra, see on either side, and this also shows you that red nucleus. The substantia nigra is a nucleus that produces dopamine that affects the basal nuclei. So, Parkinson's disease, people with Parkinson's disease, this area of the brain does not sufficiently produce dopamine. So it leads to the issues that you see with people with Parkinson's disease. Now, another thing that is associated with the midbrain is where you see here, see the blue, or not blue, it's green, called the cerebral peduncles. Those contain descending tracts, motor tracts, between the cerebrum and lower parts of the brainstem. So you also see that as part of the pons. Now, it also has something that when we talk about the functional brain areas, contains parts of the reticular formation. We'll talk about that later. Now, the second part I want to talk about is the pons. So the pons on this picture is in the light blue. So here, pons is right here. This up here, all this here, is the midbrain. And actually, it's hard to see, but the top up here is the superior colliculus. Here is an inferior colliculus. It's hard to see because it looks better when you see it from the posterior view. I'm going to erase this so you can also see, so you'll notice the cerebral aqueduct. I'm drawing the cerebral aqueduct. It runs right down that midbrain. And that cerebral aqueduct is carrying cerebral spinal fluid from the third to the fourth ventricle. Here's the fourth ventricle right there. But what about the pons? What does the pons do? Okay, so the pons does a few things. So here's the pons right here. Here's the pons here. Here's that fourth ventricle. We've removed the cerebellum, so you can't see it anymore. Now, one of the things that has it, it's a location of what we refer to as a pneumotaxic center, which is involved in regulation of breathing rate. So it will regulate what we have a respiratory center, which actually is located down here in the medulla oblongata. Now, the gray matter also consists of a number of nuclei associated with a number of the cranial nerves. And it's associated with cranial nerve 5, which is trigeminal. 6 is abducens. 7 is facial. And part, not all of it, part of 8, which is vestibulocochlear. So you see these coming from the pons. Pons actually is a word that means bridge because it's a bridge or pathway of certain conduction pathways. That's why they call it the pons. Now the medulla oblongata, which you see over here in the dark green, on this picture it's in the red. The medulla oblongata is the very most inferior part of the brainstem, and it blends right in here with the spinal cord. And it does have gray matter associated with the nuclei of cranial nerves again. Part of cranial nerve, I'm going to change the color, part of cranial nerve number 8, 9, which is glossopharyngeal, 10 is vagus, 11 is accessory, and 12 is hypoglossal. So you kind of notice that a lot of cranial nerves are associated with that brainstem. Often strokes affect the cranial nerves because they can affect some parts of the brainstem. Now, also the medulla oblongata, some of the things things that we're going to talk about is it does have a something called the nucleus gracilis and the nucleus cuneatus, and you have that written in your notes, and we will talk about it when we do sensory pathways. That's carrying information in regards to tactile information, discriminative touch, vibrations, things like that. Those tracts that we call fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus tract, they carry the information up to the medulla oblongata, where we have this nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus, and that's going to where we're going to find cell bodies of second order neurons, which then take that information to the thalamus. But we will talk about that at a later date, so don't worry about it too much right now. But important thing that the medulla oblongata has, so we're focusing here. Other things the medulla oblongata has is it's very important in certain it has, we should say, certain centers which are very important in survival. And let me trying to find a blank page. It might be easier, but I'm not going to. So I'm going to write these out for you. So it has a cardiac center, cardiac, the C, which affects your heart. It has actually two divisions, a cardioacceleratory and a cardioinhibitory center, but it affects heart rate and force of contraction of the heart. It's a location of a vasomotor center, which is very important in blood pressure regulation, which controls the tone of vascular smooth muscle. And it also is the location of a respiratory center. And this respiratory center is important in kind of just setting your basic rate and rhythm of breathing. But the medulla oblongata also is a location where we regulate a number of different functions or reflexes, things that are involuntary, like vomiting and hiccuping and swallowing and sneezing. So it's kind of a lot going on in that medulla oblongata. Now it also has these actually I want to find if I can find that picture that really shows the pyramids. So you notice it says pyramid here. So these things you kind of see bulging out are called medullary pyramids. They're going to be important when we talk about some motor pathways, descending tracts. So you're going to be involved in conscious control of skeletal muscle movement. So when we do motor tracts, we'll talk about those medullary pyramids again. Now, other thing we're going to look at is the functional brain systems. Now, the limbic system, which you see written here, this limbic system is involved in things like emotions and behavior and smell, which is olfaction, and memory. So it's a functional area, so it includes a lot of different areas, and they kind of work together, allowing the brain to integrate and respond to a number of different environmental stimuli. Some of these things that you see on this picture we've talked about before, but I'm going to mention some again, or maybe add a couple extra. So one of the things that you see in the purple is called the hippocampus, named because it resembles a seahorse. Now the hippocampus is involved in converting short-term memory into long-term memory, and also involved in spatial memory. Now information from that hippocampus is carried to the mammillary bodies, which I had mentioned previously, and then to the thalamus, actually through a tract of white matter referred to as the fornix. So that fornix, you see kind of, it's very close to that corpus callosum. So here is that corpus callosum here. Here is the fornix. Now another area that's involved in the limbic system is called the amygdala. And the amygdala is involved in processing of memory, but it's also involved in emotional responses such as fear and anxiety and aggression. And then the other area that I want to mention is called the septum pellucidum. And I'm going to show you here. The septum pellucidum is this right in here. So underneath it, I'm going to color it where it says number 12. That's the fornix. So here's the fornix. Here's that corpus callosum. So I'm going to shade in the septum pellucidum. And on this picture, you can it's showing you the septum pellucidum. It actually is a membrane that separates the anterior horns of the left and right lateral ventricles. And thing is, someone will say, well, it's not purely just a membrane where it's kind of separating the the walls, or I should say the lateral ventricles. It doesn't have any gray matter, but they believe it's involved in some other stuff. It's not just a membrane, because it does have some white matter, but don't know exactly what it does. But they do know if you have a genesis of the septum pellucidum, which if it didn't form, it is associated with a lot of developmental issues. But it is a kind of biggest thing, though. It is that membrane that kind of separates those two lateral ventricles. Now, another functional brain system is called the reticular formation, and the reticular formation is found throughout the brainstem. So it's just scattered throughout, and one of the things it's involved in is wakefulness. If it's suppressed, then you're not going to be able to wake up. Alcohol can suppress that, so it kind of makes you go to sleep, pretty much. It also filters incoming sensory information. Kind of think about it, it's like there's so much stuff coming to you at once. Your brain has a way of kind of filtering out things they don't think is necessary, and it kind of just if it's too weak or it's really repetitive, it kind of dampens it out, so you're not really having to focus on it. But the big thing that the reticular formation, it's part of you may hear it called the reticular activating system. It is definitely very important in state of wakefulness. So that's going to be the last bit of this recording about the brainstem and the functional brain systems.